Welcome. This is Generous Theology. In this episode, Chuck and Brock enjoy spending time with Professor Len Goodman's Chapter 33, Happiness, from the Cambridge History of Medieval Philosophy.
Getting ready to preach, and I went up to a man in our church whose wife had hip surgery and was just asking how she was doing. And he looks at, and I tend to do my sermons in manuscript form rather than just notes. And just to save my eyes and to keep things going, I also put it in pretty big print. So I've got 18-point print. So I've got a lot of pages there. And he sees my sermon in the Bible and he goes, "How long are we going to be here today? That looks pretty thick." Like, "Don't worry, it's okay." He says, "Well, it better not be too long. I got to get home to my wife."
Oh, my friend. Oh, that's perfect. Let's do this then, Chuck. We have today, maybe, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but we maybe have, in some sense, the easiest topic in all of philosophy, or at least, maybe let's put it this way, one of the apparently most easy topics in all of philosophy. And so we're looking today in the Cambridge History of Medieval Philosophy. We're in chapter 33. The chapter is called Happiness, and it's by a professor, Len Goodman. And of course, Chuck, like we have done in so many other chapters going through this volume, we're going back to the well of Aristotle and starting off our discussion of the Middle Ages by following what Professor Goodman has done in setting the Aristotelian background. And then from there, of course, we're going to get into how the medievals reacted to Aristotle, how they rejected him in some ways, how they built upon him in other ways. But even before setting that stage, I just wanted your fresh take on this idea, happiness. That seems to be a topic that everybody at least has strong opinions or preferences on, if perhaps not necessarily an academic philosophical background in what it is. But it seems to be one of the easiest topics to get people to talk. And I just want to throw it over to you and just say, what's it been like when you've thought about this in the past, when you've maybe talked with other people? And because it's such an outstanding topic, in some sense, it might twist or challenge the space of the kind of problems philosophy can bring to the table. So having said that, what are your fresh eyes telling you when you're thinking about this?
Yeah, I like the way that you started out saying that this is an easy topic, or at least an apparently easy topic, because as you dig into it, it does start out seeming fairly simple. Happiness. We all know what happiness is. We all experience some level of it, and also experience when the absence of it at times, and so we have a good sense of what it means to be happy. And even when you look at music and literature, there's always that theme of happiness there. I remember as a little kid learning the violin, and one of the first songs we had to play was "The Happy Farmer." And not that many years ago, one of the top summer hits was "Happy" by Pharrell Williams. It's something that's all around us. Yet there is also, as you said, it's an apparently easy discussion because we don't always, well, what does it really mean? When you start digging into it, we know the experience of being happy. What does it really mean? What's the direction of it? And I was even thinking about that a little bit today, and thinking about Beatitudes. I was preaching on the Beatitudes as they are in Luke, in the Sermon on the Plain, rather than the Sermon on the Mount. And that word blessed is in some versions translated as happy. And yet we know that the blessings that are in the Beatitudes really go beyond just merely an emotion of happiness, but they really get into a direction of the way we live our lives, that we're on the right road, we're experiencing God's blessings, we're experiencing the grace and the abundance that comes from union with Christ. And there's so much more to that than just a mere emotion. In this chapter, I think you see that as well. It starts with this fairly simple idea. Aristotle says that arts and inquiries and acts and choices aim at good, and this direction or this happiness is something that can be talked about, that's objective. And yet then what does that mean? Where does it go? And we see that there are some real differences that turn up when we talk about not only the Aristotelian background, but how Jewish philosophers and Christian philosophers and Muslim philosophers were thinking about it, and where do we go? Where do we go with that? So it's fun as a topic in many ways because we all like happiness, we all want to be happy, but it's also a serious topic as well because in the end, we need to define happiness as something. It gets into things beyond just simply that immediate feeling of happiness that we have, and does it grow into something greater? Like in the New Testament, Paul talks about joy, and joy is really it's if the seed is happiness, the big plant is joy, and we certainly as Christians understand that idea of joy, and the fact that the seed of that is in some way happiness is good, but there's also so much more too. So it's such a broad topic, and there's a lot of good stuff here to get into. But yeah, that's kind of that was my initial reaction to it as I started going through the chapter.
Chuck, I love it. That's a great way to frame that. We want to acknowledge this prima facie approach that people take to the topic, and at the same point in time, we want to maybe dig in and find out that there's something here that is worth examining, and also maybe beyond beyond the mere idea of like a subjective feeling, or like a gratified feeling, or having some sort of euphoria. Like people think about some of the most joyful moments in one's life. Winning the lottery, people think about making one of those trick shots. If you've ever seen those videos where people will set up a very intense and difficult trick shot and then film themselves trying to perform that trick shot, and they'll maybe fail 20 or 30 times trying to do that. And then when they finally make that that 29th shot actually comes across, and the trick shot just falls perfectly, and they sink this amazing and challenging, then you see them jump up, and they have this euphoric feeling. You probably remember the old advertising commercials for Toyota. They used to say, "Oh, what a feeling, Toyota." And that's a great place to start, and I absolutely think it's got to be a part of what we're talking about. But before we even get into Aristotle, which, by the way, you did well, and I think that is the right place, that's where the professor gets into it here in this chapter. But you mentioned Paul, and I wanted to bring a mention as well from the Holy Scriptures. And that is, I was reading in Nehemiah chapter 8, and here the term is used, the joy of the Lord. And the scripture reads, then Nehemiah, the governor, Ezra, the priest and teacher of the law, and the Levites who were instructing the people, said to them all, this day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep. For all the people had been weeping as they listened to the words of the law. Nehemiah said, go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks, and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is holy to our Lord. Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. Now that's from Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 10. And I was really struck by this idea. So the picture we have the picture of Israel, the nation of Israel, returning from its period of exile in Babylon. And Nehemiah is the governor. He's the leader of the people, along with Ezra, the priest, who is also teacher of the law. And so Nehemiah, Ezra, and the Levites were reading and instructing the people from probably we think the five books that start the Bible out, the Pentateuch. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Now, especially if you get to Deuteronomy chapter 28, which you and I have talked about, which is a chapter of blessing as well as a chapter of cursing. We find that disobedience brings about cursing. But if disobedience brings about cursing, and here these people were tempted to mourn and weep, for they had been the cause of their own destruction. They had rebelled against the Lord, and he had come against them in judgment after hundreds of years of trying to get them to return to him and to obey. And so these are a chastened people. And on top of it, the priest and the Levites are instructing the people in this condition. But rather than focus on the cursing, which of course is an important part of reading God's holy scriptures, the beautiful thing is that the cursing for God's people is not the end of the matter. And so God has acted. And Chuck, we speak as believers, we speak of the wages of sin being death. And if you worked for me and I was your boss and you were dutiful in carrying out your duties and I gave you the wages of death, that would be that would not exactly be the highlight on your resume, I'm guessing. That would be a very difficult situation. And that's what had happened here. But that's not it. That's not the final word from the Lord. And he finds a way to bring choice food and sweet drinks back to these people. The Lord also commands to send these good things out to the people in the community so that even those people who have nothing prepared have a chance to enjoy the favor and the bounty of God. And so the result of that, the result of this divine response to our sinful condition is called the joy of the Lord. And in Nehemiah chapter 8, it's called our strength. And what a beautiful and pressing view of what we might call happiness, maybe in an ultimate sense. So that's a lot to take in. But before we get into Aristotle and before we get into the medieval thinkers, I just wanted to give us some backdrop here with the Old Testament and some ideas, this externality, this objectiveness of joy. One other thing, Chuck, and I'll throw it over to you. Moses, when he led the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt, and when they were in their wanderings, and Moses would go up the mountain to meet with God, the scriptures testify that Moses would come down to the Israelites after meeting with God and being with him there, and his face shone. They could see light coming from his face, and that was this joy of the Lord. Wow, what a beautiful thing. Now, eventually it would fade. We have this idea not of happiness as simply something subjective or simply something that you or I get to decide what it is, but rather this objectively good, wholesome, virtuous quality. Let me throw that over on your end and try to get some thoughts in response.